Hello and welcome to this very exciting episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and my great partner, Emma. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Tom. Lovely to see you.
And we are absolutely thrilled this evening to be joined by two megastars and two of our great friends, Mary Myatt. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Tom. Hello, Emma.
And John Tomsett.
Hello, you two. Hi, Tom. Hi, Emma.
Sometimes known as the mighty John Tomsett. Anyway, that's just it, and it's great talking to you because we've wanted to talk to you. We've spoken to you both before, and because of you having recently collaborated on this incredible book, which we're going to talk about, we wanted to get you back on our program because it's proving to be a big success, and lots of people are talking about it. In fact, today on Twitter, I saw someone saying that it's the best education book they've ever read, and if even one person is saying that, you've got to think we did a good thing here. So we're going to come on to the book, but I want to start off by just saying to you to talk about why this matters so much. And today, listening to the news, the edu news, the head of Ofsted in the UK, Amanda Spielman, is talking about primary curriculum and how she's not trying to put too much pressure on people and so on. But there are people in schools thinking, wow, this is a big thing. And they want to do it right. They want to do it properly. They care about it. But it is a big thing to navigate, to really feel like your curriculum is the best it can be. So what's your sense of that? Do you feel that schools are sort of driving this? Do you feel they're being driven? And, what's your sense of where schools are in their journey on curriculum development?
Yeah, so, I think it's really important to say that, the curriculum's not a new thing. I mean, I just hate this narrative in some quarters that, it's just landed just because it's, now part of the quality of education judgment. We've had a national curriculum since 1988, and a lot of it has been pretty good. So I think for most schools, it's a matter of pacing themselves and fine tuning. And I think the only schools who would have had anything to worry about would have been the ones where in primary they just focused on SATs results and, giving children a diet of SATs practice in year 6, sometimes drifting into year 5. And those secondary schools, who are teaching children from year 7, the stuff and the skills development in inverted commas. But I think, I'm just a statistic of one, but I don't think that's a huge proportion. That being said, I think it's quite useful that as professionals we are having conversations about whether it's as strong, robust, as interesting as it could be. But my argument would be that we would be doing that because we're professionals, not because it's being driven by the inspectorate. So I don't know what your view is, John, from the schools you've been working with.
Yeah, well, if I look at it from a personal point of view, really, having only retired 10 weeks ago, the conversations I had for writing her were the best conversations I had with subject leaders in 30 years of line managing subjects. And much to my shame, so 17 of those 19 conversations with subject leaders we had for her were with people not in Huntington School where I was head. So I was having the proper conversations about the curriculum with people I've never met before in the last 6 months of my 18-year headship career, which seems to be just criminal. And despite my protestations and your protestations that we're doing this work for a brilliant curriculum for the children, undoubtedly there has been something around the inspectorate that has spurred this interest in the curriculum on. And I keep coming back to my mantra, which is, what is a school if it's not what we teach children, and not what they learn. So yeah, there's a bit of it, Tom, that I feel worried about because the big thing is Ofsted and the curriculum is part of it, rather than the curriculum being the thing, and Ofsted is a byproduct of a brilliant curriculum. And I keep saying to teachers, to head teachers, to CEOs, get the curriculum right, and Ofsted will be completely fine with you because you can just talk about what a brilliant curriculum you've got, and it's just worrying the other way around. The other thing that I think is Mary and I have some concerns about is now we've started primary conversations, is the secondariization of the primary curriculum that is a concern for us. And I was talking to someone in East London last week, 2 weeks ago, where in a primary school, the inspectorate deep dived into computer science and languages. And that's got to be scary, in the current climate with the language that's being used around disciplinary knowledge, substantive knowledge, conditional, declarative. And I think there is a concern around that. But as Mary said, this isn't new. And the people who've been doing the right work all the way along will be absolutely fine.
And I think, it's because as soon as you bring the inspectorate into it, there's a kind of that people go, ooh, but actually, we've all done it. You did it in this book. I did it last week for 2 whole days in one school. It's the best 2 days I've had in ages, just sit and listen to the curriculum leaders tell me about the stuff they're teaching. And they're the most excitable people. We're doing this and we're doing that. And they can't stop talking. It's pretty exciting, really, for having, to create a culture where people are saying, this is what we teach and we're not sure about that. And I think that's quite cool. So Emma, do you see this? John just tossed in that phrase there. Let's just let that hang there for a minute. The secondaryization of the primary curriculum. Is that a thing?
Yes. In a nutshell, yes. Because they're 2 different parts of the sector. They serve 2 completely different services, 2 completely different setups, from everything from staffing to resourcing to the organisation of the building. They are 2 completely different things. And as soon as you try and replicate what happens in one part of the sector in a kind of direct transference model, it's not going to work, and it's not going to serve the children. Because if you think about primary children when they come in when they're 4, they're just on the cusp of toddlerhood, some of them. And if you're then trying to do like subject-specific teaching with a child who can't yet go to the toilet properly a lot of the time, or put their own clothes on, or has no concept of number, it's really difficult. And I think that, yes, we want really high standards, and yes, we want rich curriculum, but what we can't do is say this works really well in secondary, let's just pick it up and drop it into primary, because the children you're serving are at a different stage. And I do think it's a worry, and I do think there's massive pressure on primary schools, primary colleagues, because we haven't got the same setup that a secondary school has. And I do think it's driven predominantly by the inspectorate, because I wouldn't say we were happily pootling along before all this happened. We weren't. There was lots of work to do in the sector. It wasn't perfect. But with this really sharp focus on subject specialism at primary, it has kind of skewed what primary is about, in my mind. I don't know whether John and Mary feel similarly or differently now that they're working on primary, huh?
So my concern is that just dropping the narrative in of the conversations around the curriculum and plonking it on primary really does distort thinking and does distort practice. So for one thing, I think it's fair to say as a generalization that most secondary schools are similar. They're structured in ways that have faculties, departments, and the only thing that really differentiates them are the number of pupils, but basically the structures are the same. When it comes to primary, you've got some primary schools. One of the ones in Walthamstow that is being considered for one of the mini Myatts has 950 children in there, bigger than some secondaries. And yet you've also got, probably on the edges of London, some schools where you've got mixed age classes. And so you've got that huge range. And then to place those similar expectations from one part of the sector onto another without finessing it, without making sense of it, because I don't think we can get away from the fact that children are entitled to the national curriculum, however that is constructed. But then to for some commentary, well, you go off and do this work in your departments. I mean, that is cutting out, 60% of the sector. And so it's just about taking those principles and making sure they're humane and nuanced for the sector, because my view is actually, for instance, some of those small schools with mixed age groups actually do some of the most sophisticated carousels and working on plans over several years, and the children do really well. And I'm actually using some of those insights to encourage all schools, whatever their size, to take those principles and develop work over time. And also it just seems to me to be insulting. Why again, I'm only a statistic of one, but my view is that a lot of the talk, certainly on social media, in terms of the books that are coming out, they are from secondary colleagues, and there's a kind of assumption that it just kind of works across, and I just think that's really patronising.
I have seen some good stuff. I mean, so when I'm doing some work with Haringey, so I've been doing the walkthroughs sort of stuff, teaching, learning, and they're also working with Steve Mastin, who some of you know is a history teacher, and Christine Council, and they've been writing these amazing sort of booklets to support history, geography, and RE curriculum. And so, I go into a lot of lessons, and I see these booklets, and the teachers are using the materials, and they're feeling sort of tooled up. They feel like we've got some quality in the stuff here. Now they still have to do the job of making it their own, and then interpreting it for themselves, and making it feel like it's their curriculum. But when they have these quality resources that have been really mapped through the whole of year 3 to 6, there's a journey that they know they're on that's been mapped by someone with expertise they couldn't all have. And because it's across lots of schools, they can talk about it to each other. And that to me seems like a really sensible thing, to sort of outsource some of that and create quality materials. Which
my view is that provision is going to grow to meet that demand.
Yeah, and it seems like a sensible thing, but it obviously can't feel like it's a secondary thing brought in. The topics aren't. I mean, if you're talking about the Indus Valley, it's not a secondary topic. It doesn't belong there, does it? It's got its home in that kind of. It's foundational in so many ways. But John, let's just hear, because you obviously between you had this idea to do her. And a lot of people, we've said it a few times, and maybe people listening to this thinking, what the hell are they talking about? So just for people who don't have any idea at all, what is it? And we've waved the book around. And what was the kind of origin of this? I
think the origin of it came from a year ago, just over a year ago. The secondary head teacher asked me to do some work with him to hold his middle leaders to account for the curriculum. And my response to that was, how can you hold them to account for the curriculum if you don't know anything about it yourself? And it got me thinking really hard. And it really did rebut his approach in a way. And I ended up working with him a lot, but in a completely different way to how he anticipated. And it just made me start thinking about that issue that I've had. And I call myself a chocolate teapot, because I've line managed for the last 8 years. I've line managed departments for 30 years. Right? I've been a senior leader for 30 years. And all I've ever talked about is data in that time. I've never talked about the curriculum in that time. And I've left it up to them, and I've never really had a conversation about it. And so I line managed languages for the last 8 years. And the head of languages at Huntington Cherry Bailey has got a double first in Cambridge in German and Russian, and I've got a CSE grade 1 in German from 1980, right? So I know if I went and looking at Brighton, I travelled to Brighton on the train, I don't know much more than that about German. So in two ways, that's a problem, because I cannot encourage her to look at other texts or anything around German, and then I have to believe everything she says about her curriculum, because I can't challenge it. And so I emailed Mary back in February and said, I've got this idea for a book. It would be the subject leader's guide to the curriculum for senior leaders. That was the kind of what it says on the tin. And so Mary had a brilliant idea of saying, well, why don't we interview people? We can put the Zoom videos up on my video channel on Myatt & Co. And we get them transcribed by the elves in the attic, in the Myatt attic. And then you can pare them down from 10,000 words to 3,000 words. And then we'll do a couple of other things, and we'll call it a book. And the interviews were just amazing. They were tremendous. And we interviewed really heavily through the spring term, and then 90 minutes, evening after evening. And the subject leaders, every single one of them enjoyed it. Every single one of them said their subject was the most important in the curriculum, obviously. And we also interviewed 2 senior leaders. And what was great about it was when we got to the end of it, and it felt like this was really going to be something good. Mary, classicist by trade and marketeer by trade, said, we need a cracking title for it. So I was reflecting on the fact that every single person we interviewed said that developing the curriculum is a never-ending process. And we very started using the phrase, the never-ending story of the curriculum. So I suggested Janus-based conversations, the Janus, the God with 2 faces by Janus for January, the Janus curriculum conversations, and she kind of liked that. But I know well enough now to know she was a little bit lukewarm about it. So I looked up the God of Endlessness, who happens to be who? And he's the God of endlessness. He's also the God of fertility, creativity, and regeneration. And so we thought that was the brilliant God, the God of the curriculum. So that's why the book's from her, and that's the story behind it. And it's just been, I think, with all the feedback we get, like you said on Twitter today, an incredible success. And one of the things that I've come to realise, Tom, and everybody, is that I'm not interested in doing work anymore that really doesn't help people. Right? I can write books on leadership, but I'm not sure how massively useful they are. And the last book I wrote on leadership for Staff First has lots of practical stuff in it, rather than theorising and having a bibliography of 15 pages long. This is stuff that people are really actually finding massively useful. And in the same way, Thomas, as your walkthrough stuff is actionable and developing stuff in the classroom, I feel this is doing work that's
that's the threshold for success in all of this stuff is it interesting and is it useful? Some things are interesting but not very useful, and some things are useful but not very interesting. This definitely is a double hit. Emma, what did you like about her?
I do really enjoy the fact that it was talking to people kind of on the ground, doing the job. They're actually day in, day out, actually delivering on this, that it's not been written in some ivory tower somewhere. This is on the ground. But what I've really wanted to ask Mary and John since I've found out about the book is you've spoken to all these people who have kind of like shouted about their subject, got their platform for it. But in terms of your learning from your interactions with these people, what was the thing that you thought, I wish I'd known this ages ago, or I wish I'd looked at this subject or this in this way? If I could go back and have my time again, this is the bit that I wish I knew. I've just been wanting to ask both of you that.
Yeah, so this taps into the other meaning of huh, which is John and me saying at certain points, huh, we didn't know this. So you've got this double play on it. I'll give you a quick example. So we interviewed a colleague on classics, and she had some really great strategies for the end of year 9 if the students weren't taking it into GCSE. And she put on this programme of just all the useful things in a sort of very practical way, in terms of etymology, in terms of, quirky stuff, because a lot of ancient history is actually really sexy, really dark. It taps into all sorts of things that we all are intrigued by, and teenagers certainly are. And I just thought that was a really neat way of capturing that. But I think that the this idea of keeping students motivated via the vehicle of interesting stuff was something really interesting that I took from that. The other big thing that had a big emphasis on me was the provisionality of a lot of it, that people were still exploring. They certainly never thought that it was set in stone. And I particularly loved the conversations with the history colleagues, where they were really taking the time to explore current historical research ongoing, at the moment, particularly around the contribution of South Asia in the Second World War, completely neglected part of history, but making it really live, as they were engaging with the historians who are actually still going through the archives as well. So it was really fascinating.
I've got this book to pose for my next question, and literally so random, but maybe it's not. I've literally got the history curriculum page open, and I'm looking at this. I was going to ask you, and that's just so bizarre. It's one of the favourite inquiry questions I've seen in the curriculum. It's year 8. How has the historian Yasmin Khan used evidence to reach conclusions about experience of the Second World War? So that's the thing that I got as well. It's like, it's just a brilliant insight into thinking this is what curriculum could be. This is what curriculum could be.
Yeah, and it's so engaging for the adults. Not that we're doing it for the adults, but as you're teaching it, it's riveting. But also it's drawing the children in because they recognise the provisionality of some of this and how people come to conclusions. But I think the interesting thing to respond to there, John, in relation to that as an inquiry question, it being really strong, really robust, because there's a lot of flaky thinking around inquiry questions, which can be incredibly powerful, very fertile. But too many of them have the answer implied in the question. It's like, so for instance, very low level one, but why is it important for Muslims or Jews or Christians to go to their place of worship? Well, is it? Can't you be a Christian and not go to a church, etc.? There's this implied thing that is in the title is already going there. And you see quite a few in history as well that have just not been properly thought through. Whereas that kind of really open-ended, engaging, authentic kind of question is just going to lift the lid off the experience for those students. So, John, was there anything that you were really surprised by? Because that was a great question from Emma.
Great question. I think the thing that surprised me most is how little I know. Because I was teasing Dr. David Priest about geography just being about Oxbow Lakes and map reading, and then he went off on one. And I now understand geography much better because my son just started geography at university, and there's so much I didn't know about geography, just ridiculous amounts, and how something that comes from Ruth Ashton's book about the mediation of knowledge from universities through the DFE in schools to pupils. There's a whole load of mediations that go on from the subject as pure subject as decided upon by the kind of subject community at the HE level, and then what we actually present in schools. And I found that really fascinating, and that was a line of pursuit and interest all the way through the conversation. Really, really great.
So when you were listening to them, John, was there a subject that you think, if it was this, I would have done more of it? Is it kind of inspired you to think differently about any of the subjects?
I wish I'd been taught modern languages by Hannah Pinkham, and I think then I would have flown with modern languages and ended up with a CSE grade 1. Because she made it so attractive and so accessible in the way she designed the curriculum. She eschewed everything I'd ever seen. And just to summarise, in year 7 and year 8, they created 3 Spanish-speaking children across the globe and 3 French-speaking children across the globe. And then all they did, the whole curriculum was based on emails and pen pal letters to each other, which developed a narrative over 2 years. The department wrote it. All they focused on in 7 and 8 largely was getting pupils speaking in brilliant French and Spanish accent as fluently as possible. So when they started on picking the grammar in year 9, they didn't have to do all that vocabulary that destroys children. They'd done it all in a really lovely atmosphere where they felt safe and they could develop, they could speak, do the language. And when children say they can do French, what they mean is they can speak French. And it was just inspiring. I wish I'd been taught by her.
That's fantastic.
I think it's fair to say that each of the people we talked to, there was an absolute, at least several nuggets where you just thought, oh, this is just exquisite. The depth of thinking, a really interesting one for me. So beyond the classics and Lucy Cresswell and the history with Cat Priggs and David Hibbert, my background is RE. And I've been involved in a lot of work, curriculum development, a lot of initiatives nationally in RE. And so listening to Nikki McGee, it's like, oh my goodness. It's like, mate, you are next level. You are next level. And so that was a real joy to see, the next generation coming through and really upping the game of the subject. And this is what we're finding too with primary. My goodness, I did a primary one with Adam Smith the other day, and Rachel Higginson. And again, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the level of thinking that is going on about the subject at its bigger level, the lens through which and theorizing the subject, because RE is an odd subject. There isn't an RE department in universities. We can't tap into all that history and geography stuff. And so I think what it's done is exposed the level of deep and sophisticated, but also very accessible curriculum thinking that I think just people are going to find so helpful. But a real shout out, to everyone who's been involved in this. And I think two other things really came through from talking with colleagues. One was they love their subjects, and they all said, unprompted, at some point when we were talking to them about their ambition for the subject and what they were intending to do was to transform lives for them as human beings. It was far more than just the exams, which obviously are important. So there's this real depth of, we are making a contribution to their deep human development, of which the cognitive and intellectual is a part. The other thing was the extent to which they said they really enjoyed having these conversations rather than just analysis and question level analysis of and data and that sort of stuff. There is a place for that, but there's been a gaping hole in school professional conversations that this is missing. And then the final thing was that just on a couple of occasions that they wanted senior leaders to take it seriously. And so Joe Baker, for instance, saying, it's really not helpful if you as a senior leader say in either a meeting with me or in earshot of children, my art, I can't do art, I can only do stickmen. It's really just sending out a demeaning message about it, that it's not for everyone, it's sort of like, it's trivializing it. So there was this real sense of having pride and standards in all of them, but done in such a humane and witty and just lovely way.
Comes across is their kind of that spirit comes across, and I find this, what I'm thinking is about this is that the way there's a sort of tension here, which is it's a bit like when you do, say, the timetable where in the secondary school where you've got only so much time and you have to divide it up, and everyone wants more time for themselves ideally, but doesn't know who to take it from. And there is this feeling, this sort of double-edged thing of being part of a whole and championing your subject. And I love that. I kind of love a feisty head of department who's saying, my subject matters. But at the same time, there is a sort of give and take, and there are whole issues about the status of the arts and things. So then you've got a leader's job. This is what I'm interested in, is if you're a leader, if this is your curriculum too. And so how do you find this came through, do you think? Like, if I'm the head of a school, I've got this person wanting to do this stuff, but it's also my school and it's our school, and it kind of belongs to more than just these people. Does that come through to you? Do people sort of respect that, or do they feel they should be kind of left alone to make these choices in their silo? Did you have that? Did you have any thoughts about that, John?
I think they were really keen for school leaders to be involved in the conversation. That's absolutely where they were about it, and the idea that they in every chapter they gave us 3 things each senior leaders should read about each subject to gem themselves up on the subject. And the thing that Mary and I have been saying all along is that this is a 2-way process. I think the subject leaders have a responsibility to educate the senior leaders, and senior leaders have a responsibility to do the work. Right? They've got to do the work. And in that way, then it's a collaborative process. There's not holding to account. It's like working together to create the best curriculum we can, right? And it just I've been saying to lots of senior leaders across the country, you need to reframe your idea of what your role is as a senior leader. And you're a co-collaborator on the curriculum, not a holder to a counter. And all this, the language of holding to account has no place in this curriculum development work. It's how can we educate each other and get excited about the work we're doing and the curriculum that we're developing.
This thing of what I think is interesting is it's like opening a box. So when the stuff like it's like a series of revelations, and the summary sort of the sample curriculum at the back of each chapter is almost just like a sort of, obviously you have to read the chapter and then it makes sense. But I do think Martin Robinson has this quite neat idea about, just in terms of teaching, how comparing things helps you learn about two things. So if I'm looking at one painting, I can study it and think I know stuff about it. But when I look at another painting next to it, it's in comparison that I can say, oh, okay, now that tells me something about not just the new painting, but the other one as well. And I feel like this is what's happening to me when I'm reading this. I'm thinking, oh, why have they put, curious incident in year 8? What's going on here with, they still teach of mice and men in that school, but they do Hunger Games and Billy Elliot. This is so interesting. And I haven't seen that before. And it's the comparison. And that to me feels like a sensible general idea that lots of people ought to be doing, is looking around to see, this is what tests out your thinking, doesn't it? And it's just brilliant material for that.
Yeah, and I think the particularly that English one, that they're very clear, Mandy Lawson and her colleagues, that they're starting off with text that are doing two things. One is taking children beyond their context, which they all need to do, but a particular issue in her part of the country, but then also honouring the local context as well. And so one of the things they're doing with those texts about, you could have conversations about, worth and all the rest of it, but they build around each of those some really sophisticated extended reading built on those themes, and that is really extending the repertoire for those pupils. So it's way beyond just those texts, and pre-prepared booklets which have been collated by and collaborated on by the staff. And I have to say, I was a bit concerned about us putting individual plans in there, in that I thought there might be some pushback, or people say, I wouldn't do it like this one. But it's not been the case. People have used them, as you say, for stimulus, for discussion. They're all strong in their own terms in any case, but people have taken them in the spirit in which we've offered them. Everything's provisional, everything's work in progress, but it's so helpful to see other examples. And nobody wants a blank piece of paper. It's always easier to edit someone else's work than it is to come up with it yourself.
And that English one is really interesting because they've got Skellig in the scheme, and there's a passage in the book with Mandy Lawson says, I'll get slaughtered about Skellig because it's often seen as a primary school text rather than a secondary school Key Stage 3 text. And it's made me think a lot about text and choice of text for English. So I do a little bit now where you might look at a curriculum and you might find in the middle of year 8 the novel is either Skellig or Animal Farm or Hard Times, right? And you can ask the question, well, which is the most challenging, rich, knowledge rich? And the macho amongst people might say, well, we're doing Hard Times, Dickens. But if you teach Skellig in a way that emphasizes biblical and classical allusions, and you have texts like Mrs. Midas around it by Caroline Duffy, it also exemplifies one of the 7 ways of telling a story in narrative structure, then that's a really good text in there because you're teaching things that is rich and challenging and demanding. You might have Animal Farm, and you might think that's about right, but you might teach it as a fairy tale and just fall in love with the horses and get upset when they die. If you don't teach all the context around it, it's a nightmare. And then you might teach Hard Times because you're thinking it's a challenging curriculum. I've got GCSE Christmas Carol coming up, and you might completely kill Dickens for every kid in the classroom and make it a disaster when they get to year 10. So it also depends upon how you teach the stuff and the approach you take, not just on a side of A4. Oh yeah, we teach that then. How you teach it, how you assess it, all those things are really important too. So it's made me think about something that Christine Council talked about not just where something is on the curriculum, it's also about how it connects with other stuff they've done, how they build, as you would say, Tom, their schema up across, and the interplay of incidents across the curriculum.
I'm just fascinated by now. It's just occurred to me just now that obviously in secondary with single subject teaching, that lack of interconnectedness opportunity as well that is we have in primary to do that. When you say reading around the subject, and we're thinking, topic gets a really bad rap in primary. But actually,
Emma, I've been blown away, by the primary conversation I've had so far. So Lekha Sharma on the curriculum spine that goes through that was just phenomenal. All the different literature texts on which they hang the curriculum. And then last night with Neil Allman, that's something we began with by saying how different primary is to secondary. Trying to get my head round being the kind of the conductor of all the different strands of writing, right? So scribing, phonics, knowledge, all those things that you're just trying to get into place in a class of 30 that mean by the end of year one, children can write a sentence. It's just mind-blowing what you have to do.
Let's formalize this bit here, because I feel like we need our listeners to get up to speed here. What's going on here with the primary her? Emma, break the news.
Oh no, it's not my news to break. It's Mary's and Tom.
Mary, go on.
Tom's to break, sorry. I'll let Mary explain it.
I think almost as we were finishing it, while we'd had a lot of feedback from primary colleagues that they'd found her very interesting, even though that we had focused the conversations around Key Stage 3, because John and I wanted to unpack the idea that Key Stage 3 is the intellectual, or should be the intellectual powerhouse of the school, and then into Key Stage 4. So we knew we'd got something worthwhile based on their feedback, but it also became clear that there was a lot of material that was worth unpacking in primary as well. And so the way that's been structured, as John and I have secondary backgrounds, both got experience across others. I've done a lot of work from early years up to Key Stage 5, SEND, alternative provision. But nevertheless, it's not in my DNA. I have to say, if I had my time again, I'd train as an early years teacher. But so what we've done is, which I think is quite smart, we have got a team. And so it's either John or me. And then we have either Lekha Sharma, the lovely Emma, on this call, and Rachel Higginson, and so that we've got that primary perspective as we ask those questions, and so we've got that going, and we've got then I want to do one for SEND and one for alternative provision, so I think that's probably going to take me to my grave doing those. It's just so interesting.
It's so interesting.
I think that tension is so interesting. So I feel like this, you're right to say topics have had a bad rap, and there are some really good ones. And I think one of the biggest insights, well, it wasn't an insight in the sense that it was a revolution, but I thought it was an interesting switch of emphasis that John Hutchinson from the Reach Academy was talking about, where he was one of the, I guess a sort of a strong proponent of a knowledge-rich curriculum and really locking down. This is what you should know in year 3 about the Vikings. This is what you should know about, about Benin in year 5 and mapping that in detail. But what they realized was that they've got knowledge organizer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But it's hard to hold on to all of that knowledge when you learn it in a kind of in an immature state. You need to form something more secure that's bigger than all of those individual things to something. The spine of that is more important than the individual bits. And now they're thinking, what's the spine? And the knowledge organizer details sort of hang off that. And that might sound to some people like, they might be thinking obviously. But I think it's a good thought process to go through that, to kind of come to that conclusion that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you talk about, the secondaryization of the primary curriculum. Booklets is an absolute classic. They're very prevalent in secondary, but a lot of the time they don't translate directly without a bit of tinkering. And the other thing that happens within topic that kind of gets a bad rap, because some people don't necessarily understand it, is that when you're in primary, you're a novice in everything, absolutely everything, as in the child is. So when you're doing history and you're talking about hundreds of years ago, your mathematical knowledge you might not even understand what 100 is. So it's absolutely meaningless. Or if you're talking about ancient Egypt, you don't know where Egypt is, or you don't know what a desert is or a river is when you're talking about, the River Nile and what have you. So topic in primary is actually really important, because you have to think about not just the individual subject specialism, but all of the interconnected knowledge that needs to feed into that subject that you're talking about in order for them to make sense of it. Because otherwise, if you teach in a subject specific way, the pillars that subject sits on of all the other interconnected subjects aren't necessarily there. So you have to think more broadly about what do they need to know from the other subjects in order to be able to access this subject. But done badly, it becomes a big homogenous lump. done brilliantly, it's actually what do they need to know in order to secure this. And you can't do that through a single subject knowledge organiser particularly well, because you have to do the thinking about what else they need to know to be able to access this. And that's what I think is really interesting about primary at the moment, is kind of the reclaiming of the importance of not topic, but an understanding of the interconnectedness of the different subjects.
Well, I found this image, we're in the middle of a series of curriculum masterclasses, and I found this image, which I'm going to make more of just in preparing for my talk. It's just a case that I do prepare my talk the night before. I know that's hard to believe. But I found this brilliant. It's a thing from a photography website where it shows you how the pixel depth per square inch or something changes. And so it's a picture of just a field with clouds. But at one level, it's just very big, fat pixels, so you can barely make it out. And then they get more and more smaller and smaller. And then the picture gets more and more vivid. And I thought that was a great analogy, because rather than it being one thing, then another thing, then another thing, then another thing, then another thing, you're gradually sort of filling in the details. And so, and that holistic view of something is something sometimes we don't think hard enough about.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. And one of the ones I've been using is Walt Disney's storyboard. So he invented storyboards. And there's a great image of him standing against a wall with the outline of the film that they're working on. And then in that meeting, they're focusing on one or two scenes. And to me, that's a great analogy for the group. So what's the kind of background stuff that children need to be aware of, and I need to make sure I'm preparing my children for as we focus in on this bit. So it's a similar notion of the going in and out, those different lenses in that very holistic way. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to. By the time this goes out, it'll already happened. But your masterclass tomorrow, and it's one of the things I'm really. I listening to people give their ideas, but one of the people I think everyone needs to know about, I'm going to shout him out now, is Howell Ruppers. Everyone should listen to Howell, because he's. Am I bothered?
Botheredness. He is. He's hilarious. He's absolutely hilarious. But gosh, he's so in. He is so there. He's so on it. He's just hilarious.
Botheredness, and I think the thing he was talking about today was not engaging children, but getting them invested, and that's a different level. Invested means I'm in this. There's this great story about this boy called Maxwell who's been sent out of class, and he's saying, "I hate them," and he goes, "Who?" And he goes, "Them," and he's talking at a picture of the Romans. What, you hate the Romans? Why do you hate the Romans, Maxwell? And he says, "Well, they were ages ago." He hasn't yet understood the significance of them, so he doesn't know why he should be interested. And it's all about getting Maxwell to be bothered about the Romans.
It's brilliant.
I mean, come into it, John. In your work beyond HERP, but generally, how do you think this engagement issue gets played out?
How do you mean, Tom? Sorry.
Well, sometimes people go on about you shouldn't teach just to engage children, or fun gets a bad rap, and it can get a bit sort of worthy and serious, which it should be. But of course, then we want students to be able to add fractions and.
Well, I was having a conversation with someone today, last night. I was with Rachel Higginson, and I remember taking on a year 10 class, and I took all the naughty boys out of all the English classes, put them in one class, and I taught them GCSE English, right? From the middle of year 10 all the way through. And they were the naughtiest boys in the school. And I don't know if you remember the English GCSE AQA booklets. And it was a short story booklet. And there's one called My Polish Teacher's Tie. So I went down to the Polish deli in town, got all this food, got the chef, got the kitchen staff to cook it for us, because I had them immediately after lunch, and we had a big Polish lunch, and it made no bloody difference. They still hated it. I mean, so all that effort to try and engage them. So then I thought, well, I'm going to pack that away, because that was a waste of time. And I shelved the GCSE booklets, but I got Norman Mailer's The Fight, right? And brilliant piece of writing. Showed them Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman, 1974, Rumble in the Jungle, and showed them the video of When We Were Kings. I got them to write a piece of writing, be published in the booklet. They were either Ali or Foreman, and they had to write the fight from their perspective, and we produced some amazing stuff. And then we went back to the short stories, and they lapped it up, right? Because I engaged them not through entertainment, but doing really engaging, rich curriculum stuff. And that, to me, is the heart of engagement. You know, making it really interesting, but not ever kind of going soft on the quality. Pitching it right up there and make it engaging.
That sounds properly sensible. So, Emma, what do you think? What do you think the kind of the take will be? Do you think people will, you know, we talk about this quite a lot, you know, in our master classes, and going back to we talked about at the beginning, the curriculum discussion. It feels to me, because of the specialism angle, that the Ofsted angle is more critical than primary in terms of people feeling the heat. Is that what you're feeling, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Partly because although we have specialists in primary, you know, every teacher in primary has a specialism, but you don't necessarily have all of the specialists available on that staff. And also, if you're leading a subject in primary, you don't necessarily get given the subject that is your specialism. And you may be leading multiple specialisms. So you may be leading, you know, last time I was teaching, I was leading upper key stage 2 literacy, maths, science and assessment. So I was all at the same time whilst full-time class teaching. So they do feel the pressure in primary. We do feel the pressure because we're subject to the same external accountability measure with the same framework, yet we haven't necessarily got the same sort of subject experts to tap into day to day. And we're not necessarily leading a subject that's our particular specialism. And we don't necessarily have any release time in which to do it at all, ever. And then in terms of time budgets in school, you know, if you've got 30 staff meetings a week and you lead the science department, you can notionally, for 30 of those meetings, look at science. Whereas in primary, you've got the same 30 meetings, but spread between 10 different subjects. So yeah, primary colleagues do really, really feel the heat, because there's all of that they're meant to be doing about curriculum and subject specialism. And also then still doing what we were always doing in primary about early reading, early maths, social development, child development. All of that is still needing to be going on. So it's hard at the moment in primary. That is basically, it's really hard. People are feeling like they have a huge job of work on to do things that they are not necessarily given the time or the space to be able to do a really, really good job of it, when they could do a great job of it, but there's not the time, there's not the space, and there's not the expertise to tap into on a day-to-day basis. So it's tricky at the minute in primary, really tricky.
And I think we just need to get it into proportion, don't we? Because there's so much great work goes on, and I go to primary schools all the time and see just really interesting stuff. I was in a school the other day where they're talking about Plato, and it was just this is great. You've got year 4 sort of talking about what does a philosopher do, and you know, and it's creative and it's interesting. So you feel like we should find a sweet spot of just people feeling they've got the energy and they've got the support to be creative without it feeling like it's excessive pressure. Mary, doesn't seem like to me that seems unrealistic, unreasonable. So why does it to make it fun?
Yeah, so I think there needs to be a reappraisal of actually what's expected to be taught from the national curriculum in primary. I mean, some of the subjects they could do with more information about what needs to be taught. I'm looking at art. The only one that's seriously over-bloated, and even then I think it's manageable, is history, and that's because Michael Gove got his mitts on it. But that needs to be taught across a whole key stage. And I think people look at it and think, gosh, that's an awful lot. Yeah, well, it is an awful lot if you're trying to do it all, thinking you've got to do it all straight away. So my view is, and a lot of my work is around underpinning it by the big ideas and concepts, not worrying if there's a bit we don't end up teaching, because nobody's going to die. It's better that children have a fewer things in greater depth underpinned by the concepts and the big ideas. So they've really got a grasp and a grip on it. And Christopher Such is very good on this. They just pull together the stuff that's really, really important. And I do think it is possible with some creative thinking and some creative planning. But, I've done extended pieces on that and what that might look like. A unit on science programme of study in year 6 on evolution, a whole thread, a bit of a reading spine from early years, although it's not the national curriculum as we know, through Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, based on just 3 texts and colleagues working together to really nail it. So I think it's about reassuring people, just do a few things really well, and that will be cumulative over time.
And reading being at the core of that, I guess. I mean, so many people we've had on our programme, Sonia Thompson, most recently Alex Quigley, they get like table thumpingly and evangelical about reading and the skill and the will, as Sonia puts it, getting children to want to read, but also being able to read, and how that's bigger than anything. I mean,
and those insights, underpinning new material with high quality text. And I know we're about to finish, but I just need to share this with you. Based on that Sussex faster reading research, with a real ramping up of pupils' reading ages in a trial in year 8, small trial, questions around it, but the thread is being replicated elsewhere. And I was talking to Gail Fletcher, who is head of Gloucester Road Primary School in Cheltenham, very diverse, complicated community that she serves, great curriculum, outstanding, wonderful results. But she ran a trial in her school on that faster reading, and there were children in year 5, 8 of them, that were off the scale. They had to use the secondary YARC reading scores for it. And so there's some really, really encouraging stuff, some really low starters, making a whole year's worth of progress on those scores. So I'm really encouraged by that. And if we replicate that, not just in literacy and in English, but underpin the curriculum with this high quality stuff driving what we want children to know, understand and can do, they're going to remember it more if it's in a delicious text. So, and I was just, I had shivers down my spine when I read her email. It's just fantastic.
No, that's fantastic. So, John, let's just wrap up now. What's your next thing going to be after this? I mean, is it her primary? Is that your project?
Her primary is a massive project, yeah. And I'll be soon receiving emails with 10,000 words transcriptions to boil them down again for chapter after chapter. We've done 5 interviews already, got the 6th in about an hour's time with Sophie Merrill about art in the primary curriculum. They've just been already really rich and nourishing conversation. Can I say before we finish, Tom, I love the smoky jazz bar effect behind you. It looks like it's really great.
Smoking. Yeah. I feel like I am just an amalgamation of all the sort of ridiculous sort of fast show characters and whatever.
You look like you should have like some
parody of myself. I recognise that.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, this is, my kitchen gets exposed when I do these sort of pedagogy kitchen, and my wife is always saying to me, why do people, when she goes to work, people say, oh, I like your new thing in your garden? She goes, how do you know that? Trouble. But anyway, yeah, look. I have to say, I mean, we know each other well, but I always feel like these conversations are amazing. We can carry them on. And I'm so excited. I mean, in the middle of curriculum masterclasses, it's something I'm very proud of the 3 of us that set up. And Emma, we're going to get you to see all of those.
What's that?
Oh,
Curriculum
for
masterclass.
sure.
What, me?
She must.
Yeah.
She must.
Yeah, you're invited.
She's
What, am I the tea lady?
Resource.
Yeah, no, you are going to be the expert, and it's so interesting. So we've got more coming up, and just we've got a whole set planned for next year, and I just feel like the appetite is huge. I always worry about how many people are the tickets as the events come closer. People go bah, 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 bah. And so we've got literally like 190 people signed up for the one we're doing right now, and that's in the middle of November. They're always saying it's such great sort of food for thought. It is the engine room. It makes people excited. It's the thing that motivates people. I think it's amazing. So I want to say thank you to you. Sorry, Emma, I want to cut.
No, I was just going to say there's such a hunger for it as well, because there are so many people doing so much great work, but there's also so many people out there who are trying to reinvent a wheel that doesn't need reinventing, because there's already the thinking out there. So the opportunity to learn from, share with experts is such a great opportunity, Tom. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it is, and that's what you've done with the book is sort of provide people with a superb tool. That's why it's doing so well. But thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
On Mind the Gap. It's a real honour to have you with us. It's great to know you both.
Great.
And thank you everyone for listening. Thanks for joining us. Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe. Thank you, Mary.
A pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you again to Emma.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, so see you, everybody. See you next episode. We've got Peps McRae coming up after this in a couple of weeks, and he's a great person. Keep tuned in, and thank you so much for listening to our podcast. See you soon. Thank you.